Hey everyone, this is Michelle with Designs by JuJu, and in today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to make the home wall hanging as well as a few add-ons that you can use for these upcoming seasons. So included within every purchase is a PDF with all of your supply list, some example projects. You can see the step-by-step tutorial that I'm actually going to be showing you how to make today. It's very detailed. It shows exactly what stitches are going to run, what you need to do in these stitches. So the first thing I did when I printed out my PDF is I went to this supply list here. I'm going to be making the 5x7 size for today's tutorial. So you can see there's an H block, an M block, an E block, and then a blank block. These are these 4 blocks right here. And then also included are some sashing blocks that go over here on the tops and bottoms. And then you also have the add-on pieces that you can see, and there are 4 additional add-on kits that you can purchase on Designs by JuJu, but it gives you the directions for how to do those. And those add-on pieces can be used in place of the O on your wall hanging. I measured out my batting, so I've already got my main block pieces cut here with my batting, and then my sashing side pieces. This beautiful gray sparkly glitter. This is going to be the main portion of my block right here. And then I have my cute flowers that'll go on the sides. And then these will be the sashings for the top with my polka dots on the side. The larger piece here is going to be my backing. I've got all my pieces cut. I did go ahead and prep my main block pieces with some SF 101 just to help prevent any puckering as I do those applique stitches. That's an optional step, but it's something that I do recommend, and it really does pay off when you're stitching. I'm going to be using a Brother Novice NQ1600E for this project. I have my 5x7 hoop loaded with some cutaway stabilizer. I prefer a traditional cutaway, not a mesh cutaway, because I just like the stability that it provides for my project. That's totally personal preference. So I'm going to go ahead and run the first stitch. All right, now that the placement stitch is done, I'm going to lay down my first piece of batting, and I'm going to make sure that I have covered the entire placement line, all sides and angles. Smooth it out, and then I like to use these little sewing tools. They are great for helping to keep your fingers out of the stitch path. So let's stitch down the tack down for my batting. Okay, now that that tack down line is stitched, I'm going to remove my hoop from my machine and trim around the batting along that tack down line. I'm going to be using some Fiskars applique scissors. I really like these. They have the curved tip on them so I can get close to the stitches without trimming them. I've just trimmed my batting, and now we're ready for stitch 3, which is going to be the placement line for my main focal fabric on my block. Okay, now I'm going to place that center background fabric covering the placement line, I should say, for those stitches. I want to make sure it's covered completely, nice and smoothed out. Okay, so this will be step number 4, and this is going to tack down that fabric. Now that I have this fabric tacked down, I'm going to remove my hoop again from my machine, and I'm going to trim using my applique scissors along this bottom line and along the top line, and then I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so I just went ahead and trimmed this, and this is the top of my hoop here, so I wanted to just show you. I trimmed right along that tack down line, and then I cut it at an angle on both ends of my center, my main focal block here, my center design block. Now we're on stitch number 5, and it's going to do the placement stitch for the right side fabric. It'll be this top part here. Okay, let's stitch it. Okay, now that I have the placement line stitched, I am going to take my side piece of fabric here. I'm using this cute flower, and I'm going to flip it so that it is face down. So I want the right sides of my fabrics together. So this is the back side of my fabric. Here's the pretty side. It is facing down. Okay, so here's my stitch line. I'm going to line it up, and then my machine is going to stitch a tack down right along here. So I'm just going to lay it. I need to make sure that the placement line is covered. So I'm going to make sure that placement line's covered, and then I'll run that stitch and show you what it looks like. Okay, so it tacked it down right along here. You can see the tack down. Now I'm going to take this fabric, fold it forward, and it's secure now. It's stitched on. And then my next stitch will run up, over, and down to secure this fabric. All right, so if I remove my hoop, you can see there is that stitch we just ran, and it secured that fabric. So now we're ready to do the left side. So we're going to repeat those steps again. So this is going to be the initial placement line for my left side fabric. Okay, so I just stitched my placement line. We're ready to place our fabric. Place that fabric right side down, hold the fabric, and stitch the tack down. All right, so I just stitched that tack down. I'm gonna fold this forward. Again, push the seam nice and flat. Load it back onto your machine. Okay, we're ready to stitch step number 10 on our file. Here we go. So now we're ready to add some decorative motif quilt stitching on these sides here. So I'm going to be using some King Star metallic, and I have just a silver here, number 1, and I'm going to use this silver to stitch my quilt motif on the sides here of my main block. We're ready to finish off with our applique letter. If you were doing the blank block, you would be done. This block would be complete, but I am doing the letter H block, so I need to stitch my H. All right, so I have just completed my placement stitch. I'm ready to tack down my applique fabric. Okay, now that that has finished tacking down my fabric, I'm going to trim away the applique fabric. All right, I trimmed my applique letter H. Now I'm ready to do the final stitch. So I'm going to be using this Sulky Poly Sparkle to stitch around my letter H. All right, my design has finished stitching. I'm ready to remove my hoop from my machine. And you can see here is my letter H block. So I'm going to repeat these exact same steps for my letter M and E block. And then like I said earlier, for my O block, that's my blank block that I can add my add-on pieces to. I'm going to repeat the exact same steps minus the applique portion on the center block. So we're ready to do our next blocks, which will be our sashing. Now that we have our H, M, E, and blank main focal blocks stitched, we're ready to jump into our sashing blocks. Now you will need 5 total sashing blocks, and the way that this file is set up is there are 2 sashing blocks per stitch set. So there are 2 that are going to stitch on this hoop. There will be 2 on the next hoop that I load, and then for that third hooping that I need to do, I'm only going to stitch 1 of the 2. So I need 5 total. I'll do 2 complete rounds and then 1 extra with just a single sashing completed on that one. So I'm going to go ahead. I've got my cutaway stabilizer hooped once again. I've got my thread ready, and I'm going to stitch my first placement line. Once the placement line is completed stitching, you're again going to lay down your batting that you have trimmed, making sure to cover all of the stitches of the placement line. And now we're going to run the tack down stitch. Again, keep your fingers out of the stitch path. All right, now I am going to remove my hoop from my machine, and I'm going to trim away the excess batting around my placement lines, making sure not to trim any stitches. All right, I have just completed trimming my batting, and I have my hoop loaded back onto my machine. Now I'm going to run stitch step number 3, which is going to run the stitch placement line for my center fabric. All right, once the placement line is stitched, I'm going to lay my center focal fabric. I'm using this cute daisy that I used on my main focal blocks, and this is going to be the center fabric for the sashing block. So again, I've got my placement line. I'm making sure all of the stitches are covered, and I'm going to tack down this center fabric. Okay, I'm going to remove my hoop again from my machine. You can see there are those tack down stitches that have secured the fabric to my stabilizer and on top of my batting, and now I'm going to just trim away a little bit of the excess. Okay, I've just trimmed right along the top of that tack down line, you can see, and then I cut it at an angle. I did that at the top and the bottom of my sashing block. So now I'm going to load this back onto my machine, and I'm going to run the quilt motif for the center of the block. All right, now that the decorative motif stitch is complete, I'm going to switch back to my traditional polyester thread, and we'll keep going. All right, we're ready for stitch step number 6, which is going to do the placement line for the top square fabric. All right, now that we have the placement line stitched, we're going to lay our fabric here. This is going to be for the top square fabric, and I'm going to lay it face down, so right sides together, and I'm going to overhang it on that placement line between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. So here's my placement line. I'm going to make sure it's completely covered, and then it's going to stitch the tack down line to secure that fabric down. Okay, taking your fabric, you're going to fold it back, press the seam nice and tight with your finger. You can see it's secure. I'm tugging on it and it's stitched down with that tack down line. So I'm going to fold it forward. And now we're going to stitch the placement line or the tack down line again to secure the fabric. We're on stitch step number 8. Remove my hoops so you can see what that looks like. And there you go. Our top square fabric is secure. I will trim away this excess when we get done with the whole block, but now we're ready to do the same steps again, but this time for the bottom square fabric. Again, place your fabric right side facing down, making sure that you have at least 1/8 to 1/4 inch of an overlap over that placement line, and run the tack down stitch. Okay, now take the fabric, fold it towards you, smooth it, press the seam tight with your finger. Again, you can secure it with some tape. I'm going to be using my little sewing tool, and I'm going to run the tack down stitch to secure the fabric in place. All right, so now the first of 2 sashing blocks is complete. So I'm going to repeat these exact same steps to stitch a second sashing block on this side. So if you have already stitched 4 sashing blocks and this one was your 5th, you can stop. Remember, you only need 5. You don't need to stitch one over here if you're on to your 5th sashing block. But this is my first one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this fabric and I'm going to fold it and secure it with some medical tape so it is out of the way of my stitch path. I'm going to do that all along here. Okay, so now I've got that fabric just pushed out of the way. I'm going to repeat the steps I just did, and we'll make our second sashing block. Now that we have all of our blocks stitched out, it's time to start assembling. So if you have done this step correct, you should have 4 main blocks. You should have an H block, a blank block, an M, and an E. And then you should have 5 sashing blocks. 1, 2, 3, and then I have 2 more over here. So I have already went ahead and prepped these blocks so they're ready to start stitching, but I'm going to show you what you need to do to prep these. So this is a dual sashing one that I did. There's a sashing block here and a sashing block here. And the first thing I need to do is remove all of this excess cutaway stabilizer. So I'm just going to cut right along here, making sure not to trim any stitches. And since there are 2 blocks here, I need to cut them apart in the middle also. All right, then I'm going to use a rotary cutter. I'm going to use my straight edge ruler, and I'm just going to mark it where I can see a 1/2 inch. Take my rotary cutter and cut it. So you have a 1/2 inch around each corner, and that'll save you some time at the end when you're ready to start assembling. Okay, so there's one done. Let's do the next one. All right, and now, like I said, we've got 5 sashing blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we have our 4 main focal blocks. So we're ready to start assembling. Okay, so when you start to think about assembling, you want to lay out all of your blocks how they are supposed to be. So I know I need my H block at the top, and then my next focal block is going to be my empty block, which would be my O. That's where all of my add-on pieces will go at the end when we're done assembling. So next I need these sashing blocks, and I'm just going to lay them out like so. And then this just continues. Okay, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start with these top two pieces, my H and my first sashing. So I'm going to move these ones off to the side. I want to attach this top sashing block to my main focal block. And the way to do that is I need to line up the outermost stitch lines right sides together. So I'm going to take this top sashing block, I'm going to flip it face down, and I'm going to line up these stitches. So I want to line these up, and I just like to start at my corner first, and I make sure my corner is lined up. And then I'm going to use some sewing clips here and start securing it. So I'm going to go all the way down, repeating that same process, lining up those outermost stitches and securing with a sewing clip. All right, I've made it over to my sewing machine, and now I'm ready to start stitching. So what I'm going to do here, this was the initial placement line for our batting, and then this was our tack down line. I'm going to stitch right in the middle of these two lines, and that's going to stitch this block together. So I'm going to come over to my machine. So I've got my stitch selected that I want to use. My speed isn't too high, and I'm going to go ahead and secure. I'm going to stitch these two blocks together. Okay, so I've just stitched, you can see, and then when you open it, your block is nice and lined. So we've just secured the sashing to the H block, and you can see, since we lined up those stitches, the corner blocks match up with the sashing, and you can't see any of those stitches that we had earlier. So I'm going to repeat these steps. Now I'm ready to add another sashing block to the bottom of the H, and I'm going to repeat these steps for the remaining blocks. I've just completed stitching all of my blocks together, so you can see all of my center blocks are attached to my sashing in one long strip. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to flip over my wall hanging, and I'm going to use my iron and press open all of these seams to help it lie flat. Pressing open those seams will help a lot as you add your backing. Okay, I've just pressed open all of my seams using my iron, and now it is time to go ahead and attach the backing. So I went ahead and cut my backing according to the sizing in the supply list, and I'm ready to attach this backing to my wall hanging. So I'm going to first flip this so the right side is down. Here's my wrong side facing up, and then I'm going to place my wall hanging directly in the middle of my backing fabric. Here's the top of my wall hanging, and here's the bottom of my wall hanging, and I am going to secure it using some sewing pins. Okay, then I'm going to go back over to my sewing machine, and I am going to stitch in the ditch. So that's going to attach my wall hanging to my backing. And stitch in the ditch means I'm going to stitch right along these seam lines right here, just in between, stitch in the ditch. I would use a thread that is going to blend in nicely. That way, in case you get off a little bit, it's not as noticeable. Okay, so I'm going to go over to my machine and do that, and then I'll pop back on and we'll finish off our wall hanging. All right, my wall hanging is now attached to my backing. If you are using, I used white bobbin because it blends in with my fabric, but if you were using like a red fabric, you would probably want to match your bobbin thread to your backing fabric. Okay, so I'm going to flip this back over and remove all of these pins. And now I'm going to trim up my backing fabric. So I need to have 1 1/4 inch overhang if I want to do a mitered corner. All right, I've just completed trimming my backing. I have 1 1/4 inch around each edge of my wall hanging. You can see that here. And now I'm ready to do my binding around the wall hanging. I'm going to do this step off camera. I'm going to be doing a mitered edge. If you have never done a mitered corner, I should say, make sure that you check out the PDF instructions that are included with your purchase. There is also a YouTube video linked within that PDF that shows step by step exactly how to do that. So I'm going to go do that, and then we'll be ready to do our final stitching, which will be our add-on blocks. So let me go do my binding. I'll show you what that looks like, and then we'll do our add-on pieces. Now that we have all of our sashing blocks and our home center blocks stitched and assembled, we are ready to start doing some of the fun work with the add-on pieces. So like I said earlier, there are 4 different add-on sets that you can purchase to customize your home wall hanging. There are also some add-on pieces included within your home wall hanging purchase to get you started, as well as a letter O if you prefer a letter O. Okay, so right now for this one, I'm going to be making the heart that is included in the add-on 3 set, and I already have some wash away mesh stabilizer hooped up onto my machine. You want to use a wash away stabilizer because, like I said here with this one, you want to cleanly remove the edges once you're finished with your add-on piece. So I have my wash away mesh hoop, my wash away stabilizer hooped, and I'm ready to run the first stitch, which is going to be a placement line for my batting. Next, I'm going to place my batting over the placement line. Once the batting is tacked down, I'm going to remove my hoop from my machine and trim away the excess batting. All right, I've just loaded my hoop back onto my machine, and you can see that I have trimmed away the excess batting. So now I'm ready for stitch step 3, which is actually going to be the tack down for my first applique fabric. Okay, so I've got my first applique fabric. I'm going to go ahead and tack that down with stitch step 3. All right, now I'm going to remove my hoop from my machine and trim around the applique fabric. You want to trim right along the edge. Again, these curved edge scissors work so great for that, but just trim right along the edge, making sure not to trim the tack down stitches. All right, I just trimmed my applique fabric for my first piece, and now I'm ready for stitch step 4, which is going to do the placement line for my inside heart. All right, again, take your applique fabric, whatever you're using, make sure to cover all of the placement stitches and run step number 5, which is the tack down stitch. Okay, now that I have trimmed the inner applique heart, we're ready to do our first decorative stitch, which is stitch number 6, and that's going to do the beautiful satin stitch around that inner heart. I'm using a variegated thread for this part. Now, step number 7, stitch step 7, is a decorative bean stitch that goes around the heart. I'm actually going to skip that step because I used variegated thread. If I had just used a solid thread, that would add some dimension to your heart on that inner portion. And then now I'm ready for step 8, which is going to be to add the backing to my add-on heart. So I'm gonna take my hoop off of my machine, And I'm going to flip my hoop over, and I'm going to attach some coordinating fabric, whatever you want to match, onto the back of my hoop using some tape. And now I am going to tack down that backing fabric. All right, here we go. All right, remove your hoop from your machine. Turn to the back side, and you're going to trim along these placement lines. Okay, I've just trimmed away the excess applique fabric on the back, so now I'm ready to flip my hoop back over and load it back onto my machine for the final stitch, which is going to be that beautiful decorative stitching all along the edges. All right, so let me swap out my thread, and we're going to stitch the final stitch step, which is stitch step number 9. All right, now that my machine has finished stitching, I'm going to remove my hoop, and you can see just how pretty that decorative stitch is along the edging. It's so pretty, and the back is secure. Okay, I'm going to remove my stabilizer from my hoop, and then we'll be ready for the next step. All right, I've got my stabilizer removed and my add-on piece here in front of me. So what I'm going to do, so I'm going to cut along the edge with my scissors to cut it out of the wash away stabilizer, and then we'll go to the next step. All right, you can see here I've just removed that excess stabilizer using some sharp scissors. Now what I'm going to do, since I used a wash away stabilizer, that means it's water soluble, so I'm going to take a Q-tip saturated with water, and then you're going to run it right along these edges to remove the excess, that little bit of stabilizer that's left. All right, I've just removed all of that excess stabilizer. So I'm gonna let this dry. And then when I'm finished, I will be securing my add-on pieces using a safety pin to that blank O block. There's not an O on it, but it would be where the O is at in the word home. So there's some options for that, for how you would like to secure them, but I'll just be using a safety pin for that portion. All right, everyone, my wall hanging is complete. I went ahead and did my binding along the seams, and I mitered off my corners. I completed 2 more of the add-on pieces. The Christmas tree and the snowman are both from add-on set 4, and I cannot wait to hang this on my front door. There are instructions in your PDF if you want to add little loop tops to hang it a different way. So check your PDF if you want an alternate way that you can hang this. But oh my goodness, this home wall hanging is absolutely adorable. I hope you have enjoyed today's tutorial. Make sure that you check out the Designs by JuJu Blessings Facebook group for more ideas and inspiration. We have a lot of fun over there, and there are always freebies being shared. So make sure to check that out, and happy stitching!